Gabe Candea with the Beacon Group here at Compass. My specialty my entire career has been with commercial real estate, most likely investment real estate, a lot of multifamily. Going back in time, my dad came to this country, to Chicago, Illinois, from Romania, communist Romania, and so my whole family, I grew up around the kitchen table saying how great private property is. So real estate's been in my blood from the very beginning. I came to San Diego in 2010 and jumped into property management, learned the lay of the land, focusing on the fundamentals of owning and managing rental property throughout the county, knowing all different types of condos, townhouses, multifamily. So I worked on that, and I went into brokerage for the next 10 years of multifamily properties. So the reason I'm saying that is because I focused on working with sellers of investment real estate. And the conversation there is a lot more different than working with someone who's interested in selling their home for a variety of reasons. So it's very important to figure out what those pressure points are for a seller and why it's going to be impactful, some of the stuff we're talking about today, to a seller. Why would it be something that they'd be interested in talking to you about? So when it comes to those things, a lot of the sellers, and I work with buyers too, but buyers for investors, as you all know, are a dime a dozen. I mean, we're all investors, we have investor clients, etc., but we want to work with sellers. We want to control the real estate, you want to be in charge, especially when it comes to commercial investment real estate. It's very hard to get your foot in the door as a buyer's agent. So when you're working with sellers, you'll talk to them and you'll say, hey, listen, you bought this property for $200,000 20 years ago, now it's worth $1 million. Isn't that incredible? Wouldn't you want to sell that property? Oh, I'd love to sell this property, but I have two problems. One is, what do I do with the money? And I don't want to pay the taxes. Those are the two major problems that you're going to have when you're working with an investment client, a seller, and hopefully these two will go ahead and take care of that. So, moving on. IRC Section 1031, very boring, right? But it is an impactful tool, it really is. So like-kind exchanges, we'll go through the do's and don'ts of 1031s, and then we'll move on to the meat of the matter. So when it comes to 1031s, you have to make sure it's like-kind, all right? So you can do a 1031 out of pretty much any investment property. The only thing you can't do a 1031 out of is your primary residence or a second property / vacation rental. But you're allowed to do your rental houses, commercial properties, multifamily, etc. Now, what can you exchange into? It needs to be an investment property, but you need to be a holder of the real estate. So you can't invest in another personal residence that's not an investment property. You can't invest in REITs, R-E-I-Ts. You can't do construction, flips. You can't do stocks, bonds, any of those interests you're not allowed to do. So keep it to investment real estate and owning it as a percentage, then the IRS is okay with that. Okay, so one of the important things to know, from a 30,000-foot view of a 1031 exchange, if you're selling a property, you want to replace the value of that property in order to do a correct exchange. So if you're selling a property for $1 million, you have to replace $1 million. To go down a little bit deeper into that, you're going to have debt and equity associated with your down leg. So you need to replace the debt and the equity. So if you have $600,000 in equity, $400,000 in debt, you need to replace both of those on the up leg. That part's very important. So moving on to that part, because the debt part's a very important part that people forget. All right. Yeah, and when it comes to, just to give you a little more background on the replacement part, what the IRS cares about. IRS, you might think, is why do they allow 1031s? Why would they want someone to do a 1031 and not pay the taxes? Well, the IRS reports to the Treasury. The Treasury is the one who actually created this about 100 years ago. It's been around for a very long time. And the whole point of that is they didn't want people selling properties and taking that money and going out of the country. So the 1031's allowed as long as you keep the money in the country. So they like that. They don't want you to back down in the value of the property. They want you to ramp up. It creates jobs, and everyone knows that. Okay, so you'll see on your worksheets, we have a few on your second worksheet, not the first one. I'm trying to go into the numbers too much, but I promise in the presentation I'll go into a little bit. The numbers are important, guys, so it is important to understand on a very basic level what your client's going through and what they would go through in a 1031 exchange. So if client A has a property, and let's say it's 50% debt, 50% equity, and they go and do a 1031 and they replace that property with a property that's worth $1.5 million, and they put $500 in equity into that, and they take a $1 million note, it's fine. They've completed their exchange. In the second option for client B, this is the part where people get tripped up. Basically, if you were to buy a property for, in this case, $833,000, you put the $500 of your equity into it, but you only took a loan out for $333,000. Remember, your previous loan was for $500,000. Now, this is called mortgage boot. Even though you moved all of your equity into the next property, you have what's called mortgage boot, and you get taxed on boot. So that part's important because you don't want to get taxed. The whole point of the 1031 exchange is not to get taxed. A couple of things to know about when it comes to planning for a 1031. It's not too many things you have to do, but there's a few of them. The structure. Whatever structure you're in you're selling the property as, you need to purchase the next property in that structure. Well, it's your name, or it's an LLC, or it's a trust. That's the structure that needs to move forward. You need to have an exchange accommodator, also known as a qualified intermediary. They're basically like a second escrow. We're pretty agnostic on who we like to use for those. Their job is pretty easy. They just got to hold your money for the most part. They give you a little bit of tax guidance. They give you a little bit more information, but for the most part, they hold your money. Making sure that the language in the contract, so guys pay attention, you need to have a line in your contract when you're doing a 1031. It's a very simple line. It just says, seller intends to orchestrate a 1031 exchange at no cost or delay to the buyer. So that's just showing intent. The IRS likes to see intent. Evaluate the replacement property option before selling. So you want to have that conversation of what they could buy before they move forward. So we just talked about the QI. They take care of timeline management. They help you with IDing the next property. They help you a little bit with tax and legal guidance. But you're not allowed to take constructive use of that money. So if that money hits your bank account, if it goes to your attorney, if it goes to anything that the IRS might consider as constructive use, you'll blow your exchange. So it has to go to what's called a QI. All right, so this chart, I told you before, it's a little confusing, but for the most part, you're the exchanger, your client's the exchanger. They're going to sell that property to a buyer. The buyer will send that money to the qualified intermediary at the end of close. Then you'll spend the time to find the next property. Once you find it, you'll send them the money their way, and then once you get the property, you will be with a completed exchange. Timeline. So once you close on the escrow, that's when all the timelines start. So you have 45 days to ID your next property. We'll go over the rules next. You can do 3-property rule, 200% rule, etc. But you have to identify in paper, in writing, to your qualified intermediary within 45 days. A few months after that, you have to close on that property. So it's 180 days from the close of escrow. All right, the 3 ways to identify. The most common is the 3-property rule. You can name any 3 properties you want. You can name the Empire State Building if you wanted to. So you can name up to 3 properties, any property you want, any value. The 200% rule, people use this one when they want to name more than 3 properties. However, if you want to name more than 3 properties, you have to stay below the 200% rule. So if you sold a property for $1 million, you can name as many properties as you like, as long as they all don't equal up to $2 million. So that'll be the important part for 200% rule. Make sure you don't go above 200%. The 95% rule, no one really uses that. Essentially, if you're buying a portfolio, that would be something that you would use it for, but rarely does that happen. All right, the benefits of the 1031. This is it, tax deferral. This is what you're trying to accomplish. You want to defer those taxes. It's going to be federal, state, depreciation recapture, and the newer one out of the last 5 years is net investment income. It's also known as the Medicaid tax, which could be up to 3.8% for some people. All right, so taxes. We have 20% capital gains tax. Net investment one we just talked about is available in some cases, 3.8%. Depreciation recapture, that's the one everyone forgets about. If your client bought a property for $600,000 and depreciated it down to 0 over 20, 30 years, they're going to pay 25% of that $600,000 back if they pay taxes on it. Obviously, we're in California. We're in the highest bracket. For some clients, we'll be in the highest bracket, 13.3%. So when you're doing this tax deferral, in the industry they call it swap till you drop. It's a pretty crass term, but basically you want to keep deferring those taxes, and you can do a multiple 1031 throughout your lifetime. And then when you pass, any estate attorney will tell you, and your CPA will tell you, you will get a stepped up in basis. Your heirs will get a stepped up in basis. And so you'll actually have, your heirs will have a stepped up in basis. They can actually sell that property for essentially zero taxes, which is actually pretty rare. So that's the swap till you drop part. So deferred taxes, what
You go back one. We're writing some of this down. You're moving quick.
Yeah, so when it comes to taxes, this is all, what does this equal up to? Typically, for someone in California, 35 to 40% in taxes. That's really, really significant. You're walking into a listing presentation and you're telling your client you got $1 million investment property. And that's fantastic. Their probably eyes will glow up and they'll say, listen, I'm a millionaire, that's fantastic. Then they go, after your presentation, they're like, okay, I think I'm going to sell. I'm just going to talk to my CPA first. Great. No one kills more deals than CPAs and attorneys, right? If you want to solve a problem, hire a broker. If you want to find one, you got to hire a CPA or an attorney. So when it comes to those guys, you'll get a call, 3 or 4 days later saying, I just found out that I'm not going to be a millionaire anymore. I have $600,000 in the bank. I'm not going to have $1 million. So that's the part where it's very impactful. That's a lot of money to be giving away when you don't have to, especially for a lot of these clients who are planning to reinvest it anyways. So why not reinvest a higher percentage, a higher principal amount? And so this is an example of, this is a typical client in California, guys. $600,000 was a purchase price, who knows, 10, 20 years ago. Ends up turning into a $1.8 million property. We've all seen it, it happens all the time. Depreciation, they might have depreciated that entire amount, $600,000. Their cost basis, so the way that they calculate capital gains is they say it's the purchase price or the sales price, subtracting the cost basis, so subtracting the basis of the property. So if your basis is zero, it's not $600,000 anymore, it's zero, then you've got a much bigger capital gain amount to work with. So that could be the entire $1.8 million. So this one's also in your worksheet. Kind of goes over the taxes here, and they do add up. So 20% on the 1.2, you got 13% on the 1.8, net investment income tax 3.8, depreciation recapture. This is the one I told you guys is a big one. $150,000 in depreciation recapture. That's a big one. So you're ending up from a $1.8 million sale, your client has 1.1. Whereas if they do a 1031, they got 1.8 to move. So this is really where you kind of put it all together. Obviously, we're deferring gain. We're going to have greater purchasing power moving forward. You're going to also improve your cash flow for your client, which is most of the time, which is fantastic. We're just doing the numbers. We're like, hey, listen, if you had $1 million property, and you did a 1031 into an asset that's paying 5%, that's $1,050,000, right? If you had $600,000 and you try to get to that $1,050,000, you have to have a 75% return. So, don't go chasing yield, just preserve the wealth. Preserve the wealth that you've already accomplished. And a lot of these clients, I told you before, and we'll show you in these worksheets later, after their depreciation, as much equity as they've built in the property, and a lot of them are not maximizing the rents that they have in these investment properties, their return on equity is typically between 1% and 3%. I see it all the time. You're going to see in these worksheets later. If you can find a 5 to 6% investment for them to trade into, that's essentially doubling their cash flow, So why is that impactful? Who's our client here? We're talking about a 60, 70, 80-year-old, maybe 90-year-old client who's all they care about is their retirement income. And we already talked about it. They're going to swap till you drop. All their advisors have said, you can't sell, you're going to pay too much in taxes, you got to give it to your kids, you got to give it to your heirs without paying taxes. And so they'll do that. They'll do that for their kids, and it's fantastic. It's a legacy for them. However, mom and dad don't get to enjoy the income as much as they could. So if you get to maximize this and still achieve your legacy goals, your estate planning goals, why wouldn't you? On top of that, you have it's passive income. So you go from actively managing, apartment building or a different investment property to where you're just collecting mailbox checks. So it's really a win-win for our particular client that we're talking about. We're trying to imagine who this person is. This can be a great tool for them. And with DSTs, we'll talk about it later, you can diversify into a number of them, so different asset classes, different locations. You can go into other real estate markets. Maybe someone's not too excited about California in the near term. They can go to other markets. And number one is to preserve wealth. they did a poll for a lot of wealthy people in the past, and they said, what would you rather have? Are you focusing on return? And a lot of them said, no, I want to preserve the wealth. I mean, I've come this far. I don't want to go. I'd much rather be more conservative than take a chance on losing what I've built already. Okay, so that's your mindset of your typical client. So Delaware Statutory Trusts. All right, so this is where we're at. A great replacement property. Okay, Delaware. You probably don't even know. You think about Delaware so little that you didn't even realize it's not Delaware. This is Delaware. So that's how much you guys think about Delaware. So moving on, you have Delaware is a business trust. It's a business trust that is allowed in the state of Delaware. What you need to know about it is that the IRS blessed Delaware Statutory Trust as a 1031 eligible product in 2004. So it's not been around for that long. And it's been taking some time to get ramped up, but now the products are coming in, the companies are basically building these products for them. And it's been fantastic because it allows for it. So you can't 1031 into a REIT, with REITs, which is also a real estate investment trust, but what's different about REITs is that you don't own a piece of the property. You own a company that owns real estate. So they don't allow that because you own shares in a company, you don't own interest in real estate. Whereas with DSTs you do. All right, so these are also the hurdles and the expectations you'll need to know with your clients. DSTs are liquid. Okay, what I mean by that is that there's a sponsor who is the trustee of the trust. Now that sponsor has full control of what to do with that property. Now they have a lot of alignments of interest. They'd love to go through a full cycle of a DST and then have you go into another one of their DSTs. And so they have an alignment of interest. They want to create these DSTs, and there's not that many sponsors in the space, so they know if they screw up, they're going to be out. I mean, they're the ones that are, and we have a bunch of offerings over here you guys can check out afterwards. It shows you who these guys are, who the sponsors are. Most of them are multi-billion-dollar real estate companies. So, but they are liquid, and so most of the hold periods are between 5 and 7 years. Can't be more than 10 years. There is no secondary market for DSTs. So, and the investors have no control. And a lot of our clients, really want that control. You just need to talk to them and say, what's more important? Would you rather have more control and find something that doesn't really work for you financially and requires more work? Or do you want to say, you know what, I like this offering, I like the sponsor, I like the product, I'm going to go ahead and move into this. So that's something you have to have an expectation conversation with your client about what are the limitations and the restrictions of DSTs. When it comes to DSTs, there's the 7 deadly sins. So I won't go into all of them, but for the most part, what the IRS, why they allow DSTs is because they're actually very conservative. They have a lot of conservative call limitations. You're not allowed to do a renegotiation of the lease. You're not allowed to do a refinance of the property. You're not allowed to have a DST that goes over 10 years. You're not allowed to have big capital improvements. So basically you're buying assets that are turnkey, that are pretty conservative. There's no big financing risk, or there's no big risk of construction or vacancy loss. These are properties that are already performing, and so you're kind of setting it and forgetting it.
Are you getting a return on these?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. Most of them are going to go out between 4 and 6%.
Okay, but just because it's Delaware, it doesn't necessarily mean that the property's in Delaware.
Right. The
Okay.
trust is just a trust.
Okay.
These properties are all over the country.
Okay. I was going to say that. I don't
Actually,
think
the one on your
they can fit
worksheet,
that
the one on your worksheet is downtown. So if you look on the right-hand side, that one's called 4th and J, and that's right downtown. It was a 178-unit apartment building. It was just built about 3 years ago. I have a client who's invested in that one right now, and that's a DST.
Okay.
He owns about 1.23% of that building. So, custom portfolios. This is something that I'd help you out with and say, hey, what could I do with $1 million? Well, we can split it up and do 250 into different asset classes in different locations. So you'll see in the worksheet where it has more examples. So, and this is really Class A stuff, guys. These are properties that are newly built. They're in prime locations, and they're getting Class A rents, and they're in prime locations. So you look at all these properties, and most of these are going to have about $100,000 minimum investment. That can fluctuate a little bit. But when you're looking at a property like that, it's not gonna, you're not gonna feel like, hey, I'm buying on the fringe, I'm buying a property that's, you know, kind of a Class C, dilapidated. You wanna find something that's gonna be prime. We also have, you know, assisted living ones that we can look into. That demographic is fantastic. I mean, really, you know, those ones, I think what's going on right now, baby boomers, the oldest baby boomer is 76 years old. The average person in a senior living facility is 74. So that entire generation is now just getting into that demographic. And so, and you think we have a problem with housing, with multifamily, senior housing is in real trouble when it comes to supply. Single tenant, you know, this one's been around for a very long time. I don't mind single tenant properties, but I like to have baskets of them. I like to have, you know, as your clients, your clients can go and find, you know, maybe not a Walmart, but they can probably find a Family Dollar in some location that you may not be excited about, but they probably can buy that with between $1 and $3 million. However, all their eggs are going to be in that basket. And you have to ask yourself, if something happened to Family Dollar at that location, is the town that you're in going to support the valuation that you purchased it at? These properties are being purchased as leases. You're looking at the leases and how much they're returning back to you, not necessarily what the price per square foot of the area is, etc. So you have to be a little bit careful. You can diversify that with a basket of these triple nets. What's nice about triple nets is that the income is usually a little bit better, but they're more stagnant. So they're secure, but they don't move like multifamily, like senior housing, like self-storage. Self-storage is another fantastic option in terms of, you know, this is a recession-proof product right here. You know, people need to store their stuff, and they pay a crazy amount of money for self-storage. So I actually did in our worksheet, I sent you kind of an actual custom portfolio of what it looks like. I think it ended up being about 5.26% on an average return. And it included even more options like student housing and there's some government lease properties. So there's a lot of different options. They all are, I'm telling you, a lot sexier than a Wiener Schnitzel in Paris, California, which I had a client seriously looking at one point for a 1031, you know. So it's, or a Family Dollar in, you know, Central Valley or something. You know, those are options that you're looking at for 1031s, and it's hard for a client to get excited about that. They'll say, you know what, I'll keep my 1950s threeplex in San Diego, even though I know it needs a lot of work.
Do they have any restrictions for transferring that? If they wanted to transfer it down to their children, etc.? Yeah,
so you can set that up. However your trust is set up, or your you know, if you sit your name and you have a will, that asset will move down just as if it was a property that they owned. So
okay.
the transfer is the same.
Okay.
And if you separated your money into different tranches to be diversified, can I go in 2 years later and reshuffle it? Or once you're in, you're in?
So average hold time is about 5 to 7 years. When they decide to sell, which they decide on market conditions. You know, you don't want, the great thing about the sponsor part of it, and this is the part where they have control that you have to give up, is you have to basically say, these guys know what they're doing, okay? And you don't want to have all your investors in a down market saying, market's down, let's sell, which people say these things. You know, this is something that people actually say, the market's down, let's sell. I don't know, I don't understand it. I mean, but you might have investors that are saying that, and the sponsor will say, you know what, we have a cash flowing asset. There's all these are paying out. All these investments are still paying out. You know, these companies don't just go away. Every recession, do you see these companies go away? Walmart, Walgreens, you know, it's like these multifamily properties, are you seeing them go away? People gotta live somewhere. So these are still cash flowing assets. They're sending you money even through a recession, and then when the market picks up, they'll say, okay, now's the time, let's sell it. We've already looked at the due diligence, we've seen that this is a good market to sell, and then we'll sell. So to answer your question, at that point, you can make a decision. They'll say, and they'll give you tons of time. These are huge institutional assets. These are like $50 to $100 million assets. So the next buyer is probably going to be a pension account or an insurance company or somebody big. You know, it could be Blackstone. And so they'll probably have like six to 9 months of lead time. Saying, hey, we're thinking about selling, or we have an offer. We have to go through all this due diligence. So you have plenty of time to go find your next property. You can do a number of things. You can do a cash out, take the money and pay the taxes if you want. You can go into another DST, or you can buy another property. Get that threeplex in San Diego again. You can do that. So you can reshuffle it, not exactly when you want, but you can do it over time. And then lastly, for the diversification, multiple layers of diversification. And diversification is key. It really, especially once we're going into this market where, you know, we're going to see some spots of the market and the economy, we're already seeing it, that are going to get hit hard. Diversification helps level the playing field and get rid of some of that risk while still bringing in a lot of that income. So multiple layers is fantastic. You have a layer of asset class, you have a layer of sponsors, and you have a layer of location. You know, real estate's going to be local again. You know, we're going to be looking at different locations differently. And for popularity, you know, I was talking about how it came up in 2004, and essentially it's just been ramping up like crazy. I mean, literally, what was it, 2015, it was $1 billion market. 2019, it was a $3 billion market. 2020, it was a $3 billion market. Last year was 7. This year's on track for 12 billion. So, sounds like a lot, right? 1031 exchange transaction market, the whole market, is about 60 to 70 billion a year. So that's a lot of money. 2 years ago, it was less than 5% of the market. This year, it's on track to be 20% or more. So this is why I get excited about it. This is why I'm doing this presentation. This is a fantastic product. It really is. It works really well for clients who are in our position, who are looking for something like this. And who are we talking about? We're talking about baby boomers. You know, we're talking about people who have a lot of wealth, and they're looking for stuff like this. All right, and they can't create this product fast enough. I mean, these are coming off the shelves within a few weeks. A lot of these raises are being completely filled. And we're talking about, once again, $50 to $100 million raises being filled in weeks. So there's a lot of demand for it. And if you bring this to your client, you know, we talked about it before. A lot of you are familiar with 1031s. A lot of your clients are familiar with 1031s, but DSTs, almost no one's ever heard of them.
Do they charge to, you know, manage the money?
Yeah. They charge a sponsorship fee. They have a number of fees. It's all on the front end. So when we're talking about 5% or 6% return, that's on their equity. Okay. So if they have $1 million and it's a 5% return, they get $50,000 a year.
So that's after everything's been paid.
That's after. That's net. That's
okay.
net. Yeah, but they're going to have, you know, acquisition fees. They're going to have you know, management fees, disposition fees. Yeah, that's how they get paid.
Okay.
Yeah. But they always structure things that people are looking for. You know, so there's a need there.
Right.
Yeah. And then conclusion, a few things. You know, real estate values, long-term outlook. You know, could be challenged here. A lot of your clients might be saying, hey, maybe this is a good time to, you know, get out of this investment property in San Diego. Maybe I don't want to be in San Diego right now. So you can talk to them about that. High interest rate environment. You know, we didn't talk about was how difficult and how much of a challenge the traditional exchange has been lately, and especially in the last few months. So put yourself in the shoes of the client. They have to sell their property, and before they sell, they can't really go hunting with a loaded weapon. You know, when was the last time you got a contingent offer, you know, accepted? Right. You have to wait till they sell for the most part.
Can't you do a reverse exchange?
You can. There's two issues with the reverse. One is they're expensive. A traditional forward exchange is about $1,000. For the reverse, it's about $7,000 to $8,000. So that's a fee that can be a hurdle. However, the major hurdle is that you need to have the funds to purchase a reverse. So you need to purchase the property first. If no one knows what a reverse exchange is, you do the opposite. You purchase the property first, and then you sell the downleg property. But you need to have the funds to purchase the first one. So if we're talking about $1 million property, a $2 million property, that's got to be sitting in someone's bank account, which is the big hurdle. So, and then back to the challenges is that your client is now, they just sold their property, and they have 45 days. 45 days comes and goes very quickly. And they have 45 days to find the property, do their due diligence, acquire their financing, and get all of that situated before their 45th day. They don't have to do that, but they can identify and close within 180 days. But you really want to have a secure property, because if you find out, you know, on the 46th day that there's a nuclear site underneath your property, and you're going to bail, you're not going to buy that property, you have no other option, and you're going to blow the exchange. So for you, if you're looking for a property for your client, and trust me, a lot of them are going to say, oh, I want to find another, you know, 4-plex or 6-plex or whatever it's going to be, or another investment property. Say, let's go searching, let's go hunting, but let's have this other option as a backup. Remember, back to the exchanges, you can do a 3-property rule, you can do a 200% rule. You can name a number of these as an insurance policy. And that's what happened. I had a client, the one who actually bought into this 4th and J1. We actually found a triple net in Carlsbad. we were halfway through the escrow, and the diligence came back. He was not excited about it. We bailed. He bought into this. So he had the options. That was well past the 45 days. So those are great ways to say, hey, listen, we can go for what you want, but we'll have this insurance policy as well.
So if we have a client, and during their identification time period, they could identify, like as you said, another triple net lease. They could identify, a 3-unit building, and they could identify one of these DSTs, right? I mean, they could have all 3 of those options in their basket, and then choose within their time period.
That's right.
Which one they want.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of them are. They'll say, hey, my plan A is to find this property in this certain neighborhood, right? And I want to find it. So you know what? Well, let's go for it. We have to sell this property first, otherwise just looking at something for sale is not going to help you. But we'll have an insurance policy. And a lot of people use those for insurance policy.
For an exchange, I just want to make sure that my understanding is correct. You can exchange into more than one property,
yes.
Correct?
And that's why you can do multiple DSTs. It's the same idea. So yeah, you can also do it with direct property. You can buy a bunch of
As long as you have the
condos.
same debt and the same.
As long as you follow the do's and don'ts.
invested.
As long as you follow the do's and don'ts, it applies to both.
If you're doing the 200% type deal, where you're going to name more than 3, how do they value the DST in that calculation?
So what you do, and you have to have a value that you're going to attribute to each DST. You can't just say I'm going to do a DST. You have to have, I'm going to put 100,000 into this DST. I'm going to put 300,000 into that DST. And then what you do is you reach out to the sponsor and say, hey, I've got 300,000. I'm going to put it into your DST. What's the allocation? And they'll say, hey, this is a $100 million property. Your 300,000 is 0.3%. And so they give you an allocation. So you write that down on your piece of paper. Of what your allocation is. Yeah. And remember, a lot of this stuff, trust me, this is my job to memorize all this stuff. I just really want to make sure you guys pick up on the basics that are important. Like I said, the do's and don'ts and some of the important things of when you get through a transaction. Make sure that QI is set up before you close. That's the most important part. And stuff like that. You can always reach out to me for questions, but pick up on the basics. Little things, technicalities, that's my job really. You focus on what's important.
So with a DST, it's only the cash component of what you're taking out of whatever you're selling, right? There's no debt involved in that.
I'm glad you asked that. So when it comes to one of the earlier slides about replacing debt and equity, so let's say we had that $1 million property, someone is cashing out, they have $600,000 in equity, they have to replace $400,000 in debt. Now a DST, what's great about them is there's unleveraged products and there's leveraged products. So some of them are all cash, which a lot of your clients are in all cash. Some of them have leverage. So going back to a few of the other ones, like this one over here, we have this 4th and J one. That one was about 30% leverage. So when they bought that property, they got a loan for 30% of the value. Now, that's a non-recourse loan. So you get the benefit of saying to the IRS, I got 30% leverage from this DST, but the bank can never go back to you. It's non-recourse to you, but you get the benefit of saying, yes, I have leverage on this property. And so that helps with getting that without having to go through the process of going to the bank and working out with the high interest rates and everything else.
But to her point, you'd still need the debt to be realized.
You would still need the debt, so you have to look at specific DSTs that have debt.
Got it.
Yeah, what's nice about it is that you can orchestrate it in a way to the penny. I mean, if you need $433,000 of debt, we can play with different DSTs to get exactly that amount.
Nice. Okay. That makes sense.
Typically, how long does it take to get that set up with the DST?
Less than a week.
Okay. That's quick.
Yeah, I get people will reach out, in the last week or something, saying I can't find anything.
Right.
It's the 40th day, and it's what's great about it too. It can happen pretty quickly. Each DST is going to have a PPM. It's a private placement memorandum, and it's a long document, sometimes 50 to 100 pages. But what's nice about it, and people complain about those PPMs, but all the due diligence that you would do in your own real estate transaction is all there. And we know how much paperwork there is. So what's nice about it is that PPM gets sent to you. If you want to pull an all-nighter and go through it all, you can do it. The next day, say I'm in, and it's just a matter of some paperwork back and forth, working with the QI and the sponsor and getting that all set up.
So it's like being a shark on Shark Tank when they're investing in all those companies.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
okay.
Yeah, you get to decide which ones you want. Yeah.
And of course, you looked into lots and lots and lots of them, and do you have a sense then, when a client comes to you and says, hey, I want to put 500,000 into a DST, which one is producing, the highest, or which,
Right. So the first question I would always ask them, and I'd ask them a number of them, like, what are your goals? Tell me more about what you'd like to see out of your next investment. Or the reason I ask that is because I might be talking to someone who's 50, I might be talking to someone who's 90,
Mm-hmm.
and the 90-year-old might just say, just find me something safe that pays every single time the same amount, just a decent amount. And there was one I did recently, which was a government lease portfolio. So it was a portfolio of 4 buildings: FBI building, Social Security's building, National Archives building. Okay, the tenant is the U.S. government. All right, there's the only tenant I know of that can print their own money to pay you. So I mean, that's a fantastic, for a 90-year-old who just wants a 5%, call it a day. I know it's secure. Doesn't matter what happens in the economy. I can pretty much bank on the government paying me. So with that client, I would do that. However, if someone's in their 50s or so and say, I want a few more rounds of this, and so I'm looking at growth, we'll look at multifamily, we'll look at self-storage, we'll look at senior living. So it depends on what they're looking for, and then we'll kind of play with it a little bit to see, or just diversify all the way across the board. Make sure we have a little bit of everything.
And I'm assuming some DSTs have a higher return than others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the range is going to be, on the lower end, multifamily is the lowest because there's so much demand for multifamily right now. People have to live somewhere, and these products are in high demand, but they also have growth opportunities. So here's what's going on, right? We have inflation, right? And inflation's not going to go away anytime soon, probably. So what happens is you want to have an investment that's going to be mark to market more often. What that means is that with these properties, these are 300 unit, 400 unit properties, every single month there's new leases coming up. There's renewals, there's people's vacancies that are being filled, and they're being marked at the new rate. And so every time that rate goes up, and some of these are talking about 10 to 12% year-over-year returns in terms of rents going up. And so you get the benefit of that as a DST investor. So it might start off at 3 and 3.5 or 4%, and it'll quickly turn up to another quarter point, another 50% going up.
Whereas the FBI building, as an example, might have I don't know how they do it, but like a 10-year lease, right?
Exactly.
That's not changing.
Those are triple net leases, and those are same thing with Walgreens. They're not letting you just bump around on them every year. They're going to say, I'll be in it for 20 years. You've seen Walmart, in the 20-year spot for that long.
Right.
But they set up very long-term leases. So you feel comfortable because, this is a U.S. stock listed company, and, they're also probably not going to bail on the rent. But at the same time, they're not going to see the same amount of, you'll have some bumps on a lot of those, but it won't be as much as self-storage and multifamily.
So you're going to, let's say we go into the multi-unit, where the rents are moving up every time and the property's appreciating. Are those both impacting what I get paid? Does the appreciation belong to the holder and we just get the cash flow?
Great question. So DSTs, unlike a lot of other syndicated investments, I can go out and find a property right now and I'm going to put it in an LLC and I'll say, hey, I want all of you guys to be my limited partners, right? And I promise you, I'll give you 6%, and I'll take half of it, anything over that, right? Or same thing on the exit, right? You're not allowed to have a DSTs. The IRS approved them because they let them take their fees, but they don't let them do what's called a waterfall or a performance fee. So you get the benefit of the income, you get the benefit of the appreciation. So and theoretically, if the property doubles in value, your investment doubles. So you get both sides.
So how do you get paid with DSTs?
So I wear a hat with the company that does as well. So I partner with them. I've been doing this for a long time, to where I got forced into this basically. I worked with when I got into business doing multifamily transactions. You could find help someone out with a 5-unit and help them find a 10-unit, and it made dollars and cents, and it was a turnkey property. And even though someone was in their 60s or 70s, they're like, I can handle that, no big deal. There are so many investment groups right now with staff and just bottomless pits of money, and they are very efficient, so they can outbid most of these mom and pop owners, and they can be even more efficient than a lot of them. You're seeing these investment groups, they started off institutional, kind of like this, then they went to mid-market, and then now Blackstone is buying houses. Zillow is buying houses. I mean, all these guys are buying houses. makes it very difficult for the rest of us. And they have different metrics. They have different accounting. It's like, we've all seen it. Like, how are they gonna make money on that? Who knows? But either way, you can't outbid them. So that became very difficult to do local exchanges over time. We looked at, triple nets throughout the country, and I can find a triple net anywhere in the country. I have CoStar membership. If any of you guys need to use it, Lena, I've helped out a few times. So anytime you need it, reach out to me. I'm happy. I've got a national subscription with CoStar. I can find all of these properties. And like I said earlier, I had a client, we were in a 1031, we were looking at a Wiener Schnitzel in Paris, California, which oddly enough is actually a pretty good market for a Wiener Schnitzel, but let's just say it doesn't seem very appealing either way. Fundamentals are there, but still did not seem very appealing. Walk into a listing presentation and say, hey, we're going to sell your San Diego, fourplex, and then we're going to buy this Wiener Schnitzel. It's fantastic. The roof alone will make you run away.
Yeah.
So those are triple nets that was typical for someone who wanted to go from active management to passive and just kind of collect that monthly check. Those are becoming more and more difficult as well. Even if you're in the $1 to $3 million range of equity, it's still very difficult to find something decent. Even the Burger King could be worth $5 million. So those are very difficult ones to find. And so I started working with a company that over 3 years ago, saying, like, hey, these are fantastic. Why aren't you working with these clients? And so I started working with them, and it's been fantastic because I can show somebody a great option, 400 units in Austin, Texas, or a portfolio of self-storage in Florida. This is something that actually excites somebody in terms of what you want to own. And so when it comes to why we're here today, why not take that, bring it to your presentation and say, you don't have to be handcuffed to this property, okay? I have the key, I can show you what you can do next. The 1031 alone by itself, it doesn't finish the equation, Hey, 1031 is just a process, but you don't finish out what they're gonna buy next. And if you don't finish that equation, they're just gonna say, no, I'm just gonna stay where I'm at. If you can't find me anything, then why am I gonna move? And over the years, I've had countless people tell me, go find me something first. And once again, it's in this market, you can't find something for somebody and actually perform on the buy side if you haven't sold the downline.
Well, at least with the DSTs, you could tell them, hey, this is how these different ones are performing. So that gives them a little bit of confidence to think, okay, I could sell my 3 units and go into a DST. So even though you can't get them into it, obviously, until they've completed the sale, you
Right.
have statistics
Right.
about how these different DSTs are performing. So that would give someone the confidence to sell that they might not have had with the other scenarios.
Exactly. And even though this one, the one you'd show them may not be their exact one, a similar one might be around the corner.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of these companies that are out there, creating these and building a nice pipeline because there's a lot of demand for them. So.
Can you go back one more time about the RET, the real estate, or did you say those cannot purchase a DST?
You can't 1031
The
it.
REIT, yeah, with the
Okay.
REIT, you can't 1031 into a REIT. And I don't really want to muddy the waters because I know this has been a lot of information, but there's so many more ways you guys can go with this. One, I'm not going to get into it. We'll get into it later.
Okay.
You want to ask me later about UPREITs.
Okay.
Well, let's,
721 UPREITs, another IRS code.
what I loved about this, because most of us hadn't heard of this DSTs probably, right?
Right.
Which means none of our clients know about it.
Mm-hmm.
You have a ton of people out there that own a couple buildings, 4 units. They're small, but they make up the majority of this. This is a conversation starter. They like out, they don't want to pay the taxes, and they're tired of being landlords.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know that there's this phenomenal way to pay no taxes. So for you just to ask the question, tired of owning property, wondering what you can do to maintain income but not pay the taxes, talk to me. And you're reestablishing that expertise, you're helping them, you're generating inventory, because they don't know that
great
this
way
exists.
to get a mailing list from the title company
Right.
of all the multi-unit properties in your area, and just boom, that's the Compass postcard.
There it is.
And don't be mistaken. I talk about multifamily because that's my background, but look at the last page on this one. This is a client I've been working with for 10 years since I was in property management. She's got a condo in La Jolla, and she hasn't touched it in who knows how many years. And she's trying to figure out what to do with it next. However, the property's worth probably $750,000, and she's making like $3,000 a month on it, right? sounds okay, but this is where we get back to return on equity. How much are you making versus how much it's worth? And so in this case, she has no debt. After she pays taxes, expenses, HOA, the HOA is like $600 a month there, just eating away at that. She's probably making a little over $20,000 a month, $20,000 a year from this little investment condo, right? But she's in the same boat. Her basis is very low. She's trying to figure out, what do I trade into? She really wants to go find, something in another part of La Jolla, but if you're not going to live there, finding an investment property is going to be, that's going to actually produce income and not break even, or even worse, lose money. She doesn't have a lot of options. So, and then on top of that, the rental came due, and the tenants are moving. She's got to decide, am I going to put $20,000, $30,000 into the kitchen and the bathroom, all these other things? Now money's coming out of pocket. Here's an option where they can say, hey, if your return on equity on this one is a little over 3%, and I just showed you earlier a sample portfolio that's making about 5.25%, that's a 67% increased return on what she was getting. And now she doesn't have to no longer take calls for tenants, toilets, and trash. So that one I thought was really impactful for this group. Is that it could be a rental condo, it could be a rental house. There's a lot of people that have a secondary home, and right now they're probably thinking of, well, for so long there's been no pain as a rental owner. I mean, everything is renting up quickly, and it still is. But now people are starting to say, hey, well, there's some rough waters out there. Maybe now's the time where I take advantage of my equity and move into something that's going to have more cash flow.
And this whole conversation has been built on 1031ing into a DST. I'm assuming you could just be a regular investor with some cash.
Yeah.
And say, I want to buy into a DST, right?
Yeah, you can do a DST, and a lot of the same companies have straight cash investments that will have those performance fees, and they'll have all their fees in the back end. They'll say, hey, I'm not going to take any money until I get you 8%, 10%. So there's other investments that if they wanted to look at cash investments that are also offered. So you can also do a DST, though. There's plenty of people who do DSTs as a cash investment as well. Yeah, and then lastly, once again, don't want to muddy the waters, but if you have a client that has a personal residence that has a ton of equity, and a lot of you guys know about the exclusion for 121, which is the personal exclusion. So if I sold a property and I'm married, I can take out $500,000 tax-free. The government allows that. If you're single, it's $250,000. Now, a lot of our clients might have $1 million or $2 million in gain on these properties, and so the $500,000 no longer looks that attractive. What's allowed right now, and it sunsets later next year, what's allowed right now is called qualified opportunity zones. You're allowed to transfer any gain. It could be personal residence, it could be any piece of real estate, it could be stocks, bonds, cryptocurrency, anything. As long as it's a gain on an asset, you can transfer only the gain into a qualified opportunity zone. It's kind of a little bit similar to DST, it's a little bit different. We can get into the weeds later if you want to learn more about it, but that's another option to talk to someone with a primary residence and saying, well, I can't sell because I also pay a lot of taxes on my primary residence. And what's nice about that is that you can separate the gain and pocket the basis, which you can't do with a 1031. You gotta move the whole train together. So pocketing the basis is a big one for the qualified opportunity zone. So there's lots of different options.
One of the 7 deadly sins for DSTs was you can't renegotiate lease terms. How does that apply for multifamily units?
Yeah, so for multifamily, like we talk about triple nets, you're not allowed to renegotiate for a triple net. There's a workaround for multifamily. They have what's called a master lease, and you master lease with the sponsor and you take care of the tenants in those leases. So it's kind of a workaround, but it works for that.
Because you also mentioned, 400 units in Florida, fast, I should say, often turnaround, and then raising the rents there. Is that the same scenario that you were talking about?
Yeah, so that's what you have a master lease with the operator, and they pay essentially what you would get in all that income. So the income is yours. If the income goes up, that distribution, your 1 or 2 or 3% of the building that you own, you get that increase to your distribution. Yeah. Any other questions?
No, this is all great. Thank you.
Really great.
Yeah, like I said, it's a tool to try to help you close more business, and there's a lot of people out there who have rental properties and investment properties, and they feel trapped. I mean, I've been knee deep in this for a very long time, and being able to get creative is something that I'm just fascinated by. I've done a lot of installment sales and seller carrybacks. I've actually done master leases as well. This one has been fantastic and really good for my business. So happy to work with you guys on it. And like I said, just keep the basics in mind, and then you can always reach out to me. I can help you collaborate with your client. That down leg sale is all yours. I don't look for anything in return. I'll help them with the up leg into the DST, so it's a win-win.
God, so appreciative of you taking the time to come and explain this to
Thank
us.
you.
Puts us ahead of everybody else. Really, really appreciate it.
I was texting Sean even before that sales meeting was over. I'm like, oh my God, when are we meeting? When is this? When is this follow up? Because it was just so amazing, so great to know.
So
I feel like-
useful.
yeah, really useful. That a lot
Yeah,
of
no,
people-
these, I only sent you a couple pages on the custom portfolio, but the whole thing is about, 20 pages. It walks through a lot of the stuff we talked about, but also shows them, like if you were to say, hey, I got a client who's got 1.2 in a sale, 430,000 is debt, this much is going to be equity after closing costs. What would you do, Gabe? And I can actually make it like to the T exactly what their portfolio would look like. So that kind of stuff is pretty cool.
And not to pimp you out, but I've sent a number of agents his way when they come in with questions on this or commercial, and
Yeah.
he's
Always
here
happy
to help
help.
you guys on that stuff. You'll
Yeah,
do it.
so.
And do you primarily work out of the downtown office or this?
I have another office. So when I was absorbed, I still had an office in Bayho. I'm there until next year. So, but I try coming here at least once a week. Yeah.
He's part of the Mission Valley family, technically.
Once my lease is up, I'll make sure I get an office over here. I like being around. I like being around here as well. So it's just me and Bryce over there. So that's not good. No, we're up to like 5 or 6 people now. So it's growing significantly, which is great.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for arranging, Sean.